You're listening to Quantum Conversations with Karen Curry Parker. Join us as we explore new frontiers in consciousness, science, and evolution. And now here's your host, Karen Curry Parker.
It has been said that you create your own reality. But if that's true, who is the I that creates your reality? Who you think you are, your perceptions, your thoughts, your reactions, your fears, even your beliefs can be deeply embedded in your DNA, leaving us with this profound question. Are you really who you think you are? Or is who you think you are a result of the legacy of those who have come before you? Science shows us that our gene expression is regulated by proteins located on your DNA. These proteins are called epigenes, and research has shown that these epigenes carry information and programming that's laid down often generations before you're even conceived. Think about that for a moment. The experiences of your great-grandparents, your grandparents, and parents influence your health, your DNA, your perceptions, who you know yourself to be. Research also shows that epigenes are malleable. We can change our DNA by changing our epigenes, liberating us from the idea that we are basically victims of our DNA, locked into a code that predetermines so much of our lives. We can break the chains of the past and change our DNA and heal ourselves and our families in all directions of time. What if the I, who you perceive yourself to be, has more power, more life, more light, more health, more possibility than you realize? And what if you can break the intergenerational ties that bind you into expressing less than the truth of who you are? Hi, welcome to Quantum Conversations. I'm Karen Curry Parker, and I'm really excited to have my friend, Dr. Stephen Farmer, with me today. Dr. Stephen Farmer is a world-renowned author, teacher, shamanic practitioner, and soul healer. He's also the author of several best-selling books and other products, including some amazing oracle cards, and his new book called Healing Ancestral Karma, Free Yourself from Unhealthy Family Patterns. Dr. Farmer is very unique in that he is a shamanic practitioner and somebody who is deeply rooted in esoteric practices, but who is also a licensed psychotherapist. He is a former college professor, a Reiki master, and an ordained minister in the Circle of Sacred Earth Church. He brings to his work a wealth of skills and experience. He's a writer, he's a teacher, he offers spiritual healings, and he offers clients a unique and powerful synthesis of his many years of experience as a spiritual psychotherapist, as well as a shamanic practitioner and hypnotherapist. So welcome, Dr. Farmer. I'm really, really excited to have you here today.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Yeah, it's good to hear your voice, too. It's been a little while, so ready and eager to go.
Good, awesome. So your latest book is Healing Ancestral Karma. Tell me a little bit about what is ancestral karma and why do we need to heal it?
Well, karma is a word that actually comes from Eastern religions, and the implication is that our souls go through various lives, and we continue to clean them up so that we can advance. However, these days, so much is changing in terminology, such as karma, such as shamanism, etc., as to what it really means. So healing ancestral karma, first off, ancestral. Part of my mission with this book is to really, for people to consider their immediate biological progenitors, is the right word, as mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, etc., really as ancestors also. We're unique in that sense, that most indigenous communities and older communities really think of those that have come before as ancestors. We tend to use a phrase like deceased loved ones, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But I think there's a deeper meaning when we consider them to be ancestors. The meaning being that they have come before. We are the product, as Linda Hogan, a Native American writer, said, we're the product of thousands of people. In fact, if you go back 10 generations, if you could conceivably do that, we have over 1,000. When we go back 20 generations, we have over 1 million ancestors. And if you go further than that, it's like we really truly are all related. We tend to consider ourselves really unique in that sense, and sort of in these isolated bubbles as individuals here in this culture. But what we are, I think, beginning to think about ancestors, it gives us a little different take on it, that we are still connected to the past, so to speak. Karma, in this sense, healing ancestral karma, Karen, is that we're finding more and more that the legacy that has been carried down through the generations, particularly the previous 3 generations, can be healed. And by legacy, what I mean is the wounds that your parents suffered, that your grandparents suffered, genetically can be passed along to you without any awareness, not knowing it at all. For instance, if your mother had poor mothering or lack of touch and affection, etc., you have the risk of experiencing anxiety, depression, etc. So healing that is another story. It involves the science behind it, this emerging science that has shown up in the last few years, called epigenetics, is absolutely fascinating.
And I think, there's something so profound, I think, for those of us who've been doing, healing work for, our lifetimes, to really have the validation now in the epigenetic programming and really looking at the science behind why we do some of the things we do, or why we get stuck sometimes in the places where we get stuck.
Absolutely. It's nice to see that we have some left brain information, so to speak, that indicates why certain things work. Basically, epigenetic, I don't know if it could be described basically, but in relatively short story, epigenetics is, as I said, just I'd say probably the newest science on the planet, really. When DNA was discovered and described by the famous 1953 Watson and Crick, it set off a whole, the impetus really was, okay, we're the product of our genes, so I can't help myself. This is the way I am because of my genetics. And that was really, has been seriously challenged with this epigenetics. Epi means above or beyond, epigenetics. What scientists are finding out is that, to start with, that if you were to unstring the 2 strands of DNA, about 2% is in charge of the codes for your physical appearance, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, your physical structure, etc. That certainly is part of what you inherited from your biological parents. Mm-hmm. But the other 98% used to be called junk DNA, which I find fascinating. We don't understand it, so it's got to be junk DNA, kind of sort of arrogance, of not understanding something, so we categorize it in that way. But part of what epigenetics is discovering, and scientists are discovering, is that actually this other 98% also has codes that, in the way, not the DNA itself, DNA is like what it is, but the way the DNA expresses through the genes can be modified by various life events. It can be modified, especially by trauma, by toxicity. And on the other side of that, it can be healed, so to speak, by spiritual attention, by doing therapy, by eating healthy, all kinds of good things that you can do for yourself that really can help you heal. Being able to, if you can, afford to do it, getting a massage once a month, if you could do this, things like that can really help heal this other 98%, not just the whole 98%, but the way that certain genes that express themselves can be modified. For instance, I'll give you some other information that's come down the pike here. Rachel Yehuda, who is a researcher, has discovered that Holocaust survivors, for instance, that their children and their grandchildren often will end up with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder without really ever being directly traumatized. And one can only imagine, if you haven't lived there in a situation like that, the dire kind of circumstances that would create, every day was life threatening. In other words, you gotta live with trauma every day for sometimes for years.
Well, I'll tell you that, we are Jewish, and we have 8 children between the two of us, and literally all of our girls have anxiety disorders. And literally, if we ever go to a Holocaust museum, which we tend to do for some reason, none of them can go in the train cars. And there's always a train car at the Holocaust museum. And it's just it's like seeing a snake, it's the same kind of reaction, like not going in there.
No, that makes sense, Karen. I think that's a really good example of what I just described. It's absolute. There's also war veterans, the children of war veterans and the grandchildren. Pregnant mothers. That one piece was about mothers who were pregnant during 9/11 that lived in New York. Their children also were born with excessive anxiety, as if there can be such a thing as not excessive anxiety. But they were born with anxiety, depression, sometimes major depression. 50 to 70% of the children of war veterans, for instance, suffered from sometimes major depression or some kind of mood disorder, anxiety, etc. So the example you just cited is really what that is about. So much like you could call the negative aspects of this sort of influence epigenetically, is that more positive healing kind of influences can come in. As I mentioned, you could be doing therapy, you could exercise, you could eat really healthy, you could be loved and loved, you could find your service in the world. There's all sorts of possibilities for healing this kind of legacy epigenetically. That's just amazing. Bruce Lipton, who's gotten quite a bit of good reputation for these kind of studies, he has suggested that signals from the environment can actually penetrate the cell membrane, and then they can either activate the way the gene expresses or suppress it. And again, that's a fascinating science that's continuing to unfold. A mother's emotions, they can be passed on through the placenta. If she's in a high stress in general will affect the genes, the way that the genes will express. So that's quite a bit about healing ancestral karma, about what karma really is that we carry these things sometimes without even knowing it. Like you notice with your children, when you go to a Holocaust museum, it's like, no, it triggers something in them that's just so deep and so embedded in the way that the genes are expressing in their makeup that they have a similar kind of a reaction. And it's just fascinating. So that's the other side. The other side of that is, well, what do you do? How do you heal this?
Yeah, well, how do you do that?
On one side, there's some investigation into some pharmaceuticals that may be able to affect or modify the way that these genes express. There's a suppressor for these genes that can be lifted, so to speak. It's like taking the cap off of something that is quite healthy and nourishing. Meditation, prayer, believe it or not, spirituality, can help. People are going through 12-step programs, for instance, joining in a community like that of support can feel less alone about their dealing with their particular circumstances. Things like that can be helpful. Being able to nourish yourself in so many different ways and find nourishment. Those are all the kind of things that really help us heal or take the cap off of some of these genes that have been suppressed and that have caused and influenced anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorders when there's been no major trauma that someone's experienced. The other thing, Karen, I found with healing ancestral karma, something to me is fascinating about ancestors. First of all, there's, as I mentioned, the biological ancestors. And particularly, we can more notably connect with the previous 3 generations. That the ancestors who are in spirit world can also help us. Now, this gets a little esoteric, and I do understand that that's not the only way to do this. But what I have discovered through my work, and I'm really pretty down-to-earth kind of guy. So for information, like, as you know me, from before, that. But I've also discovered through my research, both my own meditations and my shamanic path and shamanic journeys, etc., as well as reading quite a bit about this, that our ancestors who are in spirit world, one of the beliefs we have that tends to be common is that when you die, you go somewhere. Typically people think you go somewhere. It might be in the ethers, or you might go into another life, or you might go to heaven, or you might find yourself in limbo, or any number of beliefs. What I've discovered is, first off, well, however you might describe this area called the afterlife, is the ancestors who are there not only can help us heal, but they have their own healing work to do. Now, when I came across that at first, I said, that's kind of weird. Why do they have to heal? They don't have a body. But again, through my research, I found out, well, yeah, there's some things that they still need to clean up. You may have had these experiences too, Karen, where in mediumship or in dreams or whatever, an ancestor will come to you and speak to you and communicate to you. And you wake up with tears in your eyes, like there's been some release that's occurred. What I've done in workshops and private sessions is something even more proactive, which is we solicit, first off, let's say, identify a condition that's a result of this ancestral karma, whatever it may be. Let's say, it could be a physical symptom as well. You've had digestive problems. And what you do, there's a setup for this that's a little lengthier than what I'm to describe, but basically you go into a meditative state, an altered state, where you relax more and more, and then you open the gate to the afterlife, and you connect to one of the ancestors, whoever had that condition the strongest, and you send them. This is where I said this is kind of esoteric, but it works. It's not to put that down at all. It really works. Is through this process, you send them love, basically, and love is one of the most powerful healing forces in the world. And in sending them love and healing power, healing love and healing light, the ancestor absorbs it, and they are healed with any of the echoes or the remnants of that same condition. And then what they do is they send that healed condition back to you, and you receive it. And then the beauty of this too is that then you send it to your descendants. Mm-hmm. This is an exercise I attribute to David Furlong, who wrote a book about this sort of thing. I like the exercise so much, I've tried it out in workshops. And one story that comes to mind is about, in fact, a child of a grandmother who was a Holocaust survivor. This woman, who's given me permission to tell her story, it's in my book, Healing Ancestral Karma. She told me the story of how her mother was born in Auschwitz to her grandmother. Mm-hmm. Her grandmother hid the child, her mother, and kept her hidden. And what happened, though, was that she got pregnant again. Now, she had an amazingly difficult choice and decision to make. She knew, first off, that having that first child, that it was difficult enough to keep her quiet, because if there was any indication that this baby was there, that the baby would be killed, basically. So she knew that if she had this second child, that it faced even a greater risk of being killed. So sadly to say, she made the choice to suffocate the child, after the baby was born. And as a result of that, her mother, the woman who told the story, we'll call her Jane just for, so I can describe. Jane's mother was able to survive and, of course, birthed Jane. But what Jane found is that she got pregnant. And they found that through analyzing the fetus, that the fetus was potentially born with any number of problems, that and I want to say fetus had this condition that would require hundreds of thousands of dollars, medical treatment all the time. And so she consulted with her rabbi. She consulted with her own inner guide, consulted with her husband, of course, about what to do, and made a decision to abort the child, which I believe was a very, very reasonable decision. But you can see from that, for instance, the ancestral karma. Yeah. There was a necessity Otherwise everybody's lives would have been threatened and they could have not survived. Or the grandmother to suffocate that second baby. There was a necessity after considerable consultation and prayer, etc., to abort this child. And so that made it, how do I want to say, that those two difficult choices, I think, were representative of what they were faced with.
I think that's a really powerful point, too, because oftentimes I think what keeps people from healing, the stories that we continue to generate generation from generation are metaphorical representations of karmic legacy that are brought forth into form because now it's your turn to be incarnated. And, I think it adds, and I love the power of what you're doing, because I think it adds an entirely different dialogue to the dialogue of how do I heal what's happening to me. It gives people, I think, a very different place to search for answers and to really oftentimes come full circle, not just, in this incarnation, but to again recognize that the work that you do in healing yourself really truly does heal in all directions of time. And the work that you do to heal yourself really has the potential to change the story of our human experience and to change the future course of humanity.
That's well stated, yes. Hollister Rand, a friend of mine and a very gifted medium, when I was researching the book, she was one of the people I interviewed. And she said it the same way. She said, we heal forward and backward. When we do our own healing. There's one verse from the Course in Miracles that I remember because it was so simple and so solid. And what was said was, when I am healed, I am not healed alone. That when I do my work for healing whatever things need to be healed, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever it is, that goes out and that affects the field of consciousness, so to speak. When I come to understand that the life force that's in a tree, for instance, the life force that's in an animal, even the life force that's in a stone or a rock, and that I am connected with my life force, with how life force is expressing as who I am, with other expressions of that life force, or one could say consciousness, I am understanding something that goes very, very deep. And it's an experience of understanding, not a philosophical or a mental understanding. And what I mean by that is that we start to connect not only with our more immediate biological progenitors, ancestors, we start to connect with the old ones, the elders, as many indigenous communities understand completely because they've grown up with it, is that we're not really alone, that we have ancestors watching out for us all the time. Mm-hmm. Some indigenous communities believe, and it's in their culture, it's deeply embedded in their culture, that the ancestors are a living force. They're with us all the time. We don't tend to, in our Western culture, think of it that way. I have an older, I would call, you could say, elder ancestor, ancient one, the old ones. There's one I work with in my own spiritual work in shamanic healing that has been on the earth thousands of years ago and continues to come back and teach and coach. It's a coach that doesn't cost $200 an hour. Spiritual coach. So anyway, that's another aspect of this whole way of thinking about ancestors is not only are my mom, dad right nearby each and every day, and sometimes I can consciously connect with their spirit, but there's also these ancient ones that will return from time to time, that will come and teach us, that any individual may hook up with and develop a active relationship with these old ones. It's just fascinating because that's what we're seeing emerge, Karen, as you well know, is this, I've given this term about 2 weeks ago in a meditation, that we are in the midst of a shamanic revolution. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to be a shaman. That word is bandied about probably a little a little too much. But there is some meaning to it, and that is the shaman. The shaman's primary job. This is part of why I think it's a shamanic revolution. The shaman's primary job is to mediate that balance between the natural world and the human community. Mm-hmm. And when that balance is off, Karen, the indication for that is illness in the human community. And the shaman's job then is to address that illness with the help of his or her helping spirits to come up with a ceremony, something that will, a healing ceremony, a divination ceremony, something that will help heal that particular condition that's in humanity, in the human species. And when that balance is corrected, then there is harmony between the natural world and the human community. It's, you can see where we're going with this.
Oh, totally.
Totally out of balance. We're totally out of balance with it. And the good news is people like yourself and the others who listen to this podcast, the people I come in touch with, we're all in our own way addressing that imbalance, in specific physical ways, certainly in emotional and spiritual ways.
And I think there's a real, the mindset that I keep running into right now, and we're in early 2017 or almost mid 2017 because it's moving fast, is, we're polarized and there's tension and there's fear. And I keep thinking, this is actually a really beautiful thing. It doesn't feel like it necessarily, but it's kind of like when you get cancer or you have something that's obviously right in front of you that you have to deal with it. There's a blessing in that. And I say that as a cancer survivor. So there's a blessing in having to look at, okay, here's this thing that's a result of all this stuff. How can I see it now. It's not hidden. It's not in the depths. It's not something I'm not paying attention to that's sort of insidious. It's right there. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that we have this right in front of us right now is a beautiful opportunity to look at in a very obvious way. Okay, here's where we're out of balance, as you say. So I want to just ask you one last question, because I think, when we end these podcasts, I always talk about what can people do right now? If you are wrestling with maybe your karma's come up in your face and you're looking right at it, what can people do right now to really find a way to begin that healing process? What do you have for them, Dr. Farmer?
Well, first off, I'd say there's a number of technologies, both psycho-spiritual technologies and healing technologies that can address trauma. And I do believe, Karen, we're learning so much about trauma and the lingering effects of that. And the good news is there are things like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, emotional freedom technique, somatic experiencing. There's spiritual paths that people are choosing that may or may not include religion. There's religions that are, as Father Richard Rohr says, that are growing up, to be more inclusive rather than exclusive. There is, for instance, what you mentioned, this polarization that's going on, which I do agree with you totally, is it's something that has caused us who have heard the call to wake up and to continue to do what we can to keep waking up. I think meditation, yes, things like yoga, things like Tai Chi, anything like that can help you start to find yourself again. Or as a very wise man once told me, he said, Stephen, here's the deal. All these things we do, therapy, encounter groups, this and that. He says, I think it's just to help us remember who we really are. So you want to remember who you really are. Go out and walk on the earth. Take your shoes off and walk on the earth. Feel the vibration of the earth. There's a process called earthing that has shown that when you walk on the earth barefoot or in leather-soled shoes, a very interesting thing happens is that you gather electrons from Mother Earth, and those replace those electrons that are wasted away by oxidation. Mm-hmm. I'm throwing out a lot of different things, but okay, let's simplify it. First thing you do, yes, is get outside. Go sit by that tree. Sit by the tree and breathe. Start there. Look up things like emotional freedom technique. Find a therapist that can help you with that, just to help you heal your trauma, your post-traumatic residuals. I detest that it's called a disorder, Karen, but we're stuck with that, PTSD. It's not a disorder. It's the way the organismic body, the physiological body, and the resulting beliefs, thoughts, feelings, etc., result from having an overwhelming experience. In other words, it's not an order. It's got an organization to it. Mm-hmm. I'm told when I'm 4 years old, I didn't really want to have you. I should have never had you. I should have had you aborted. Well, God, that's going to sit with you and wound you. So how do you get over something like that, where the genes are now capped off for more positivity and more expressiveness? Well, you go through, find out about some of these healing technologies. I am really thrilled to see all this going on. I just love it. And where we've come since the last 30, 40 years. One story, and then I'll complete it and hope I'm answering your question. Okay. One story I love is how we used to, maybe 50 years ago, we'd considered indigenous communities, both ancient ones and current ones, as primitives. Whether they're not civilized, they're pagans, they're primitives. Now we're taking our notebooks down to the Amazon basin, to Africa, and taking notes and saying, can you teach us how to live with the earth again? Mm-hmm. Not on the earth. We've learned to live on the earth, not with it. And that's the real key to remembering who we are, is learning to live with it. As I said, simple things. Walk barefoot. There's tremendous advantages scientifically and spiritually for walking on the earth. You start to get reacquainted.
Beautiful. So I would say the very first thing to do is to go get Dr. Stephen Farmer's latest book, Healing Ancestral Karma. You can get it on Amazon and any other major bookseller. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Stephen Farmer's work, you can visit his website, which is www.earthmagic.net. On his website, you're going to find all kinds of other amazing ways to connect with Dr. Farmer. He travels, he teaches, he does shamanic healings, he does all kinds of amazing work. So go check it out, earthmagic.net. And again, Healing Ancestral Karma. Dr. Farmer, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful insight on what's really going on with our karma. And thank you for redefining karma, because that's a word that keeps coming up, and I never have really felt comfortable with all the permutations of how it's being used until today. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, glad it helped. Karen, I want to thank you. First off, thanks for what you're doing, getting the word out too. This is the kind of thing that, like I say, I know you're doing other work as well, that really influences the human species in, shall we say, maturing, moving into our next evolution. And again, I'm calling it these days the shamanic revolution, but just knowing that there's a lot of this awareness that's opening up more and more.
Absolutely.
And I encourage people who are being called to expanding their awareness, keep at it, even if you get forgetful. That's a very human tendency, is to get forgetful. But,
absolutely. I actually want to end with an interesting story, just because I'm in Seattle this week and I'm halfway attending the Congress for New Urbanism, which is a gathering of people who are working on designing equitable and fair and affordable cities. And one of the women opening our Congress for New Urbanism sessions this week was a Native American from the Seattle area. Mm-hmm. And she said something that I think was so important. She said, we are in a time where we have to all come together, because not a single one of us has the answer. And if we think we do, we're really not seeing the right picture or the big picture. And that these kinds of dialogues, whether they're at your dinner table, whether you're listening to a podcast, whether you're reading all kinds of books, whether you're, going out and just listening to other people, these dialogues are crucial for us right now, because as a species, as a group of light beings incarnated at this time, we're really dealing with some global challenges that will, like it or not, impact every single one of us, no matter what race, what color, what religion, what gender. None of us is going to be immune from the challenges on the planet. So thank you for being part of these dialogues. Thank all of our listeners for listening and integrating everything that we talk about. And let's just keep hearing each other out and finding all those pieces and weaving together this new puzzle or this new tapestry of what's possible for us. So thank you for joining us on Quantum Conversations. I'm Karen Curry Parker, and you guys have a wonderful week.
The path of the shaman often involves a death of sorts. It's not a literal death, but a death of the old ways, the death of the old self, a death that marks the ending of the old and the reemergence into a new life, a new way, a new identity. Ritual often represents this metaphorical death. We can symbolically mark a shift in ourselves, moving from the old, the past, to the new, the future. We've heard here on Quantum Conversations that quantum physicists are pretty clear that the element of consciousness that is who you truly are goes on and on forever. That at our death, our soul essence returns to the quantum field, carrying with it the history of its experience, including the history of its lineage. When I re-listened to my interview with Dr. Farmer, I was moved by the possibility of not only healing ourselves and our When I re-listened to my interview with Dr. Farmer, I was moved by the possibility of not only healing ourselves and our ancestors, but also being able to heal future generations by clearing our genetic and spiritual heritage. In spite of what the news may say, mathematical measurements show that we live in the most peaceful, abundant era ever on this planet. We are already collectively healing. When you think about what our ancestors experienced, the Great Depression, slavery, world wars, genocide, the Holocaust, nuclear bombs, great journeys across the globe leaving families behind, catastrophic illnesses, hunger, it's a testament to the resiliency of humans that we've come as far as we have. I truly believe that there are so many of us on the planet right now because we are, on a soul level, all actively working on clearing the energy of what has come before so that we can create something new, something more sustainable, equitable, and abundant. As we move forward and redefine our past and our perceptions of who we are, I imagine the soul essences of our grandparents smiling down upon us and cheering us on. May you and all your relations continue to align yourselves more closely with the truth of who you really are. If you'd like to discover the blueprint for who you are in this incarnation, please visit our Quantum Conversations Facebook page, where you can get your free human design chart and discover the purpose of your soul and the story of your life. If you love this conversation, leave us feedback. We're excited to hear from you. I'm Karen Curry Parker. Thank you for joining us for Quantum Conversations, and thanks to all our ancestors who made this conversation possible.
Thanks for listening to Quantum Conversations with Karen Curry Parker. For more information, visit joyfulmission.com.